Bom dia, sejam todos muito bem-vindos e bem-vindas. É com grande prazer que damos início à cerimônia de abertura do FACAMP Model United Nations 2025. Meu nome é Roberta Machado, sou professora de Relações Internacionais do Centro Universitário FACAMP e uma das coordenadoras acadêmicas do FAMUN, junto com as professoras Patrícia Borelli, Patrícia Rinaldi e Rúbia Marcucci. O FAMUN é um projeto desenvolvido pelo Centro de Estudos e Pesquisas em Relações Internacionais da FACAMP. Esse projeto envolve atividades de ensino, pesquisa e extensão, com o objetivo de oferecer uma educação prática sobre negociações internacionais e tomada de decisão, com foco nos Objetivos de Desenvolvimento Sustentável da Organização das Nações Unidas. Por esse motivo, o FAMUN tem o compromisso de difundir os valores dessa organização. Temos o orgulho de ser a primeira simulação brasileira afiliada à IUFUNA, International Model United Nations, o IMUN. Isso significa que o FAMUN está comprometido com a abordagem IMUN, que oferece a simulação mais precisa da ONU em termos de estrutura de liderança, regras de procedimento e fluxo do debate. Por essa afiliação, nós gostaríamos de agradecer à IUFUNA, especialmente ao senhor William Yotev, nosso querido amigo Bill, por confiar em nós todos esses anos. Agradecemos também a parceria com a Coalizão para a Reforma da Carta da ONU, em especial a senhora Reba Ali, uma das diretoras da organização e da Coalizão, por seu entusiasmo e apoio ao FAMUN 2025. Em nome da equipe do FAMUN, nós estendemos nosso agradecimento especial à reitoria da FACAMP, na figura do professor Davi Antunes, pró-reitor acadêmico. Também agradecemos a coordenação do curso de Relações Internacionais, na figura da professora Marília Mazon, pelo constante apoio a esse projeto. Agradecemos também nossos parceiros e apoiadores nessa edição: o Centro de Informações das Nações Unidas no Brasil, o NIC Rio, o Colégio Dom Barreto, Matrix Impressão Digital e EFIGE. Muito obrigada a nossos parceiros e apoiadores por investirem em um projeto ambicioso de educação como o FAMUN. Nesse ano, o FAMUN lançou um grande desafio aos seus participantes: simular a Conferência de Revisão da Carta da ONU. Diante dos desafios globais, como a crise climática, as crises humanitárias, os conflitos internacionais, nós precisamos, mais do que nunca, de uma organização internacional que possa fazer frente a esses problemas. Prestes a completar 80 anos, a ONU foi criada no contexto do fim da Segunda Guerra Mundial, com o objetivo de evitar futuros conflitos internacionais, por meio da resolução pacífica das controvérsias, da proteção dos direitos humanos e da promoção da cooperação econômica e social. Seus pilares também, como seus princípios e propósitos, atenderam ao contexto internacional de 1945. No entanto, enfrentamos atualmente uma crise do multilateralismo e cada vez mais países buscam soluções unilaterais, ignorando o direito internacional e contribuindo para um mundo mais inseguro e instável. Diante disso, a sociedade civil, e especialmente os jovens, têm demonstrado sua força ao reivindicar um maior espaço nos centros de tomada de decisão, como a ONU. A Coalizão para a Reforma da Carta da ONU foi uma das coalizões da sociedade civil criadas em 2024, no contexto da Cúpula para o Futuro. O seu objetivo é convencer os Estados-membros da necessidade de reformar integralmente a Carta da ONU, invocando seu artigo 109. O FAMUN se juntou à coalizão para dar sua pequena contribuição a essa iniciativa tão importante ao simular a Conferência de Revisão da Carta da ONU. Vocês, jovens do Brasil, terão a oportunidade de repensar a Carta e imaginar uma nova ONU, que possa fazer frente aos desafios atuais. Então, convidamos vocês a fazer, ou melhor, reescrever a história. Com esse espírito, delegados e delegadas de ensino médio e universidade participarão de 2 simulações. A Assembleia Geral das Nações Unidas, representando os Estados-membros da organização, e o Conselho da Juventude, no qual a juventude brasileira terá a oportunidade de representar a si mesma e colocar suas demandas para a reforma da Carta da ONU. As simulações terão o desafio de revisar e reescrever partes específicas do documento fundacional das Nações Unidas, o preâmbulo e o capítulo 1 da Carta, que trazem os pilares, os princípios e os propósitos da organização, e o capítulo 5, que trata da composição, funções e responsabilidades do Conselho de Segurança da ONU. Nós contamos com vocês, delegados e delegadas, para uma reescrita criativa e inovadora dessas partes da Carta da ONU, a fim de promover transformações profundas na organização, de forma a torná-la mais justa e responsiva para o contexto do século XXI. A realização do FAMUN apenas é possível devido ao esforço e comprometimento incansável de 7 jovens estudantes de Relações Internacionais da FACAMP, que compõem o Secretariado Sênior do FAMUN 2025. Agora eu tenho a honra de apresentá-los para que tomem seus assentos aqui no palco. Então, recebemos ao palco Caiane Angelim, secretária-geral do FAMUN 2025. Yasmin Alves, presidente da Assembleia Geral. Otávio Moraes, subsecretário-geral para Assuntos da Assembleia Geral e Gestão da Conferência. João Vitor Bueno, subsecretário para Gestão Logística. Marina Vendramini, assistente do subsecretário-geral para a Gestão Logística. Antônio de Paula, subsecretário para Comunicações Globais. E Matheus Toledo, subsecretário-geral, assistente, perdão, do subsecretário-geral para Comunicações Globais. Bom, esse é o nosso secretariado sênior do FAMUN em 2021. Peço novamente uma salva de palmas. Bom, agora eu gostaria de chamar ao púlpito o professor Davi Antunes, pró-reitor acadêmico do Centro Universitário FACAMP, para que ele possa fazer um discurso de boas-vindas a todos os participantes do FAMUN 2025. Professor Davi.
Senhoras e senhores, professores, estudantes e convidados, é com grande honra que a FACAMP dá início ao FAMUN 2025. Este evento, que já se tornou referência nacional, traduz o nosso compromisso com uma formação humanista, crítica e inovadora, capaz de preparar nossos jovens para enfrentar os grandes desafios do nosso tempo. Em 2013, quando foi realizado o primeiro FAMUN, o tema era o mundo em desenvolvimento em debate. Foram discutidos os problemas e o papel dos países em desenvolvimento diante das transformações da ordem mundial contemporânea. Dentre os temas discutidos naquele momento, gostaria de ressaltar alguns: o desenvolvimento da África, mecanismos de governança global, a situação da Índia e do Paquistão, a emergência da China, a crise econômica internacional, a sustentabilidade energética, o comércio multilateral, a soberania dos países em desenvolvimento. Vejam só como, já em 2013, o FAMUN tratava de temas da mais absoluta relevância para o mundo. Como não poderia deixar de ser, o FAMUN 2025 segue esta rica tradição. O tema dessa edição, United to Reform, a World Reimagined, não poderia ser mais oportuno. O mundo atravessa uma crise profunda do multilateralismo. As instituições criadas no pós-guerra, em especial a Organização das Nações Unidas, encontram dificuldades crescentes para responder aos problemas que marcam o século XXI. A emergência climática, as crises humanitárias, o recrudescimento das soluções violentas para os conflitos, o agravamento das desigualdades globais, a hegemonia americana em crise. Reformar a ONU é uma tarefa urgente e inadiável. A FACAMP tem orgulho de ser pioneira no Brasil ao trazer esse debate para o centro da sua vida acadêmica. A afiliação da FACAMP ao FAMUN e a parceria com a United Nations Charter Reform Coalition demonstram a relevância e a ousadia desta conferência. Ao antecipar as discussões que mobilizam a diplomacia mundial, como a revisão da Carta da ONU até 2030, o FAMUN reafirma a identidade da FACAMP, uma instituição que alia a excelência acadêmica ao compromisso com a transformação social. O FAMUN é mais do que um mero exercício acadêmico. Ele é, sobretudo, um espaço para a formação cidadã. Nos próximos dias, quase 600 jovens do ensino médio e do ensino superior experimentarão de forma concreta os dilemas da diplomacia multilateral. Vão aprender que a governança global não é apenas responsabilidade de governos e diplomatas, mas também de cidadãos conscientes, capazes de imaginar alternativas e de se engajar na luta por um mundo mais justo e cooperativo. Engajar a juventude nesse processo é fundamental. A transformação nas instituições internacionais não depende apenas de negociações oficiais em Nova York ou em Genebra, mas também da mobilização social, da energia crítica e da criatividade das novas gerações, que têm o direito e o dever de sonhar com um mundo melhor e com uma ordem internacional mais inclusiva, pacífica e solidária. É por isso que a FACAMP se orgulha de abrigar o FAMUN 2025, que se inicia nesta manhã. Desejo que esta conferência seja um espaço de aprendizado, diálogo e inspiração, que daqui saiam vozes que não apenas simulem a ONU, mas que no futuro possam efetivamente transformá-la. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigada, professor Davi, pelas suas palavras. Agora temos a honra de transmitir um vídeo da senhora Reba Ali, diretora da Coalizão para a Reforma da Carta da ONU, que tem uma mensagem a todos vocês, participantes do FAMUN 2025.
Hi, everyone. We are so excited that the 2025 edition of FAMUN is here after so much preparation, and what a special edition this is. We are so encouraged by the energy and enthusiasm that Brazilian students have brought to the topic of renewing the UN Charter. You may remember us as the UN Charter Reform Coalition, but we are about to rebrand, so you're getting a sneak peek. Our new name will be Article 109, a reference, of course, to the article of the UN Charter that calls for a general conference to review and update the Charter. And at Article 109, we are working to mobilize UN member states to invoke a Charter review process to make our global governance more equitable, effective, and fit for the 21st century. After all, this Charter was drafted in 1945. It is pre-nuclear, pre-digital, and pre-climate. We've seen quite a bit of momentum for our work in recent months. Brazil, India, and South Africa have publicly called for comprehensive reform of the Charter. And in our conversations with diplomats from around the world, we have seen interest from many other countries, from Barbados to Cameroon to Germany. We're also seeing a huge appetite from civil society. Our membership is growing, and our most recent member of the coalition is the Club de Madrid, a forum of more than 100 former heads of state. Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, has called for reviewing the Charter, and our work has also piqued the interest of former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown. So momentum is growing, and this year's UN General Assembly, coming up in just a few weeks, will be an important opportunity to consolidate that interest. And that brings me to FAMUN and this very special approach that you're taking this year to simulate our review conference. And no better time to do that than on the UN's 80th anniversary. So what can your process achieve? Well, simulation is mobilization. FAMUN bridges academic learning with real-world activism. And for the coalition, it is both a laboratory of bold ideas and a force for mobilization, demonstrating that if students can envision reforms, so too can member states. By simulating charter review, you are becoming civil society advocates for a global movement. You inspire imagination, leadership, and a message of change for the common good. And we hope you will carry this into your schools, universities, careers, and communities, helping to build awareness of Article 109 and build momentum for charter reform. You're also developing a proof of concept. The debates and proposals at FAMUN will serve as a living demonstration that reform dialogues can be fruitful and negotiated in practice. The coalition can present the outcomes to diplomats as evidence that Article 109 is both feasible and urgently needed, offering a concrete example of constructive reform dialogue. Finally, you are helping us co-create the vision and the process in an inclusive way. FAMUN brings fresh voices to the table, and your perspectives are so often missed from state-centric diplomacy. This inclusivity models the world we want to build, a UN that reflects the diversity, needs, and creativity of our world today. After all, the new UN we are building is for you. The injustice we see in Gaza, the inability to meaningfully govern climate change, that affects you. So we hope FAMUN will be just the beginning of a journey for you, and we encourage you to remain active on this topic. Speak out, promote your ideas, make your government hear your voices, demanding change, and perhaps more importantly, demanding leadership from them. In 1945, heads of state were able to show that leadership by embracing a vision of a better world. They can do so again, but they need to feel that pressure from us, we the people. Engaged and forward-thinking students like you are exactly who the world needs right now. A friend of mine recently reminded me that during apartheid in South Africa, daring to imagine a different future was itself a form of resistance. We need to do the same now. We need to dare to imagine that the world can be better than it is today, because that is the prerequisite for any change that will follow, the permission to dream. Fundamentally, that is what this FAMUN exercise is all about. So thank you for daring to dream, and we cannot wait to learn from your simulation in our effort to build a new international order. Hi everyone, we are so excited that the 2025 edition of FAMUN is here after so much preparation, and
Inspirados, então, pelas palavras da senhora Rebali, agora eu tenho a honra de dar a palavra a Caiane Angelim, secretária-geral do FAMUN 2025. Caiane é estudante do 3º ano de Relações Internacionais e tem interesse nas áreas de desenvolvimento sustentável, segurança e defesa. Eu acho que eu li errado. Espero que sim, Caiane. Agora vai ficar melhor. Desenvolvimento sustentável, segurança e defesa dos direitos humanos. Agora sim. Caiane participa de simulações da ONU desde 2022, tendo ocupado diferentes posições em simulações nacionais e internacionais. Então, secretária-geral do FAMUN 2025, você tem a palavra.
Bom dia a todos e todas. Sejam muito bem-vindos e bem-vindas ao FAMUN 2025. É um privilégio imenso ter cada um de vocês aqui, reunidos para a nossa 12ª edição. Essa conferência é, antes de tudo, um espaço de encontro. Encontro entre culturas, entre ideias e entre visões de mundo que se complementam e nos ajudam a trilhar novos caminhos para o futuro. Desde a sua primeira edição, o FAMUN tem se dedicado a criar experiências que vão muito além da teoria. Aqui, vocês não apenas estudam as relações internacionais, vocês as vivem. E neste ano, mais do que nunca, o nosso exercício tem um caráter transformador. Estamos simulando algo que nunca aconteceu na história, mas que está previsto no artigo 109 da Carta da ONU, uma conferência geral para revisar o documento fundador das Nações Unidas. O motivo dessa simulação é simples e urgente. 80 anos se passaram desde a criação da ONU, e o mundo de hoje já não se parece em nada com o de 1945. O texto que guiou a cooperação internacional durante 8 décadas não contempla muitos dos desafios que marcam o século XXI. Entre eles, a crise climática, que já não é mais uma ameaça distante, mas uma realidade que afeta vidas e territórios diariamente. Enchentes, incêndios florestais, secas prolongadas, todos sintomas de um planeta que exige ação imediata. E, ao lado dessa emergência ambiental, vivemos também a revolução tecnológica, com a inteligência artificial e outras inovações redefinindo economias, segurança, comunicação e até mesmo a forma como conflitos acontecem. É nesse cenário que o FAMUN 2025 propõe um exercício coletivo de imaginação política. Como seria a Carta da ONU se ela fosse escrita hoje? Quais princípios, direitos e mecanismos precisariam estar presentes para que a organização esteja preparada para enfrentar as crises atuais e as que ainda virão? Cada um de vocês, seja representando um país ou a juventude brasileira, terá um papel essencial nessa construção. Serão dias para negociar, defender ideias, buscar consensos e, acima de tudo, pensar além de soluções imediatas, refletindo sobre o tipo de cooperação internacional que o futuro exige. Não estamos aqui apenas para imaginar um mundo melhor. Estamos aqui para provar que ele pode ser construído e que a mudança começa quando temos coragem de reformar o que já não serve e criar o que ainda não existe. Eu espero que, quando encerrarmos essa edição, cada pessoa que esteve aqui sinta que algo mudou dentro de si. Que levem daqui não apenas o aprendizado sobre negociações e política internacional, mas também a convicção de que cada um tem um papel no rumo que o mundo vai tomar. O FAMUN, para mim, sempre foi mais do que um evento. É o espaço onde descobrimos a força que temos como indivíduos e como coletivo. Ao longo da minha trajetória nesse projeto, eu aprendi que transformar ideias em ação é algo difícil, mas é possível. E é isso que me inspira a estar diante de vocês hoje. Liderar o FAMUN 2025 como secretária-geral é, ao mesmo tempo, um desafio e um privilégio imenso. E o que eu mais desejo é que, ao final desses dias, vocês sintam o mesmo orgulho e a mesma paixão que me motivaram a me dedicar a esse projeto por tanto tempo. Então, sejam muito bem-vindos ao FAMUN 2025.
Muito obrigada, secretária-geral, por esse discurso tão emocionante. Bom, com isso, nós nos aproximamos do fim da cerimônia de abertura. Eu gostaria de agradecer a presença do secretariado sênior do FAMUN 2025, do professor Davi Antunes, pró-reitor acadêmico do Centro Universitário FACAMP, e da professora Marília Mazon, coordenadora do curso de Relações Internacionais da FACAMP. Obrigada por fazerem parte dessa cerimônia. Agora eu peço a vocês alguns minutinhos para nós organizarmos a transição para a nossa plenária de abertura do FAMUN. Então, aguardem que nós voltamos rapidinho. Obrigada.
The first meeting of the 12th session of FACAMP Model United Nations General Assembly is now called to order. I now invite representatives to observe 1 minute of silent prayer or meditation. Thank you. Ms. Kayane Angeline, Secretary General of FACAMP 2025, ladies and gentlemen, heads of states, governments, and delegations, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to address you at the opening of the 12th session of Acompanhe Model United Nations General Assembly. I would like to thank the Assembly for having entrusted me with this presiding over this session. I am truly honored. The magnitude of this task humbles me, as the principle at stake defines the very identity and future of the United Nations. Since 1945, the UN Charter has been our compass, a beacon guiding humanity through the darkness of war towards the promise of peace, justice, and dignity for all. The drafters of this charter knew that history wouldn't stay the same. They foresaw a day that its provision will require renewal. And they enshrined this text with the very possibility of revision, the Article 109. As United States President Harry Truman once said, this charter will be expanded and improved as time goes on. Changing would require changing world conditions will require readjustments. Today, those changing conditions are here, and the need to readjust is undeniable. Ladies and gentlemen, today our task is to breathe new life into this living document. We are here to review its preamble, the moral compass of this organization, to ensure that it reflects the realities and aspirations of our century. We are here to reassess Chapter 1, the purpose and principles that defines UN mission, so they can address challenges unimagined in 1945. Climate emergency, digital governance, global inequalities, and new threats of peace. And we are here to examine Chapter 5, the Security Council, with the goal of aligning it with the reality of the 21st century. We need a council whose compassion is more representative and legitimate, and whose working methods allow it to act with agility and resolve requiring to comfort contemporary threats to peace and security. But this conference is more than an exercise of legal reform. It is an act of collective creation. We are not simply revising a document. We are rewriting the possibilities of the future. We are building the frameworks for the world we want to live in. A world where peace is sustainable by justice, where global challenges are met with unified actions, where every nation has a voice, and where the rights and dignity of all are safeguarded. We acknowledge, of course, the central role of states as the actors of the international order. However, the complexity of our challenges and the crisis of legitimacy we face demand that we radically expand this negotiation table. The most critical voice, and paradoxically, the most absent, is that of the youth, those who will be most profoundly affected with the failure of our current system. This is why today I speak directly to the youth of Brazil. With your immensity, diversity, creative, and urgency for change, you are not just another group of stakeholders to be consulted. You are the protagonists to whom we entrusted the audition mission to rethink this charter, of questioning its limits, and of infusing the process with the energy and imagination needed to build a world actor that serves not only to the present, but the future we will inherit. History will judge us by whether we fortify this institution or allow it to remain weak. Let this conference be remembered as the moment we choose courage of complacency, the moment we renew our charter not as a relic, but as a living convent for peace. Thank you. Now I give the floor to the Secretary General, Her Excellency Kayane Angelim.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President of the General Assembly, Ms. Yasmin Braga, distinguished heads of state, government, and delegations, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to address this distinguished FAMUN United Nations General Assembly at a moment that will mark the future we dare to imagine. In 2025, the United Nations stands on the threshold of its 80th anniversary. 8 decades have passed since the San Francisco Conference and the adoption of the UN Charter. This document was born out of the ashes of World War II, built to preserve peace, promote human rights, and foster cooperation among nations. It was a groundbreaking achievement for its time. Yet the world it was built to serve has been transformed beyond recognition. We now inhabit a reality that is fast-changing, complex, and profoundly different from that of 1945. The crises we face are not the crises of 1945. They are transnational, interconnected, and without precedent in human history, ranging from armed conflicts and humanitarian emergencies to the governance of new technologies and global inequalities. This is why we are gathered here today at a general conference to review and rewrite the Charter of the United Nations. For the first time in 80 years, member states, civil society, and youth come together not to make isolated amendments, but to reimagine the Charter in its entirety under Article 109. Our task is historic: to update its principles, structures, and functions so they truly serve the world of today and tomorrow. We meet with the responsibility to honor the vision of 1945 while embracing the urgent priorities of our time: climate justice, digital governance, sustainable development, and the protection of human dignity for all. This is not merely a legal exercise. It is the political choice of our generation to decide what kind of United Nations we need for the century ahead and what kind of world we want to build together. This General Conference to review the UN Charter gathers the voices of youth who refuse to accept a stagnant system. We are here to challenge, to innovate, and to prove that multilateralism can adapt, evolve, and remain the cornerstone of global cooperation. It is necessary that the purposes and principles of the Charter embrace a new principle dedicated to sustainable development, for peace can no longer be separated from social justice and environmental responsibility. Equally urgent is the recognition that emerging technologies, especially artificial intelligence, are transforming the foundations of our societies. The Charter must address the governance of technology, establishing safeguards and frameworks that ensure innovation and strengthen human dignity rather than deepening conflict or inequality. It is equally imperative that the Security Council reflect the realities of the 21st century. The legitimacy of its decisions cannot be sustained when matters of peace and defense remain confined to a body of only 15 members, where 5 hold permanent power. Greater regional representation is not an option, but a necessity. For global security must be shaped collectively, not dictated by the few. Only through such reform will the Council regain the trust of the peoples it is meant to serve. The founders of the UN pledged to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Today, we must add our own pledge to save succeeding generations from the scourge of inaction. Let us work, debate, and imagine together, united to reform for a world reimagined. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the Secretary General for her statement. May I invite the General Assembly to direct its attention to Section E of the first report of the General Committee, entitled General Debate, which contains a number of recommendations concerning to the conduct of the meetings and other items of importance. In paragraph 12, the General Committee recommends that the length of statements by individual delegations should be 2 minutes. May I take it that the Assembly takes note of the information contained in paragraph 12 and approves the recommendation that statements should be no more than 2 minutes for individual delegations? It is so decided. May I further invite the General Assembly to direct attention to Section F of the report of the committee entitled Conduct of Meetings, Length of Statements, Explanations of Vote, Right to Reply, Points of Order, and Concluding Statements. In paragraph 14, the General Committee recommends that the length of explanations of vote or positions should be limited to 1 minute. May I take it that the Assembly takes note of the 14 and approves that the recommendation that explanation of votes or positions should be no more than 1 minute? It is so decided. May I invite members to turn their attention to Section 3, dealing with the adoption of the agenda. The question of the allocating of items will be dealt in subsequently Session 4. May I take it that the Assembly approves the recommendation for this agenda proposed in paragraph 21? It is so decided. The General Assembly has thus concluded its consideration of the first report of the General Committee. I wish to thank all members of the Assembly for their cooperation. Distinguished delegates, before opening the general debate with the member states, I give the floor to the youth representatives who will address to this Assembly. The list of speakers is closed, and I would like to remind delegates who are in the list that the length of statements by individual delegations should be 2 minutes. I now give the floor to the first speaker on my list, the distinguished youth representative, Lucas Miguel Neves Alemani.
Ladies and gentlemen, do you hear this? Nothing and nothing is exactly what the United Nations, the Security Council, and the voting countries did in the face of the humanity's greatest tragedies. In Rwanda, in 1994, nearly 1 million people were murdered in just 100 days, and the UN stood still. In Syria, since 2011, more than 500,000 lives have been lost, while resolutions were blocked by vetoes in the Security Council. More recently, in the face of the greatest existential threat, the climate emergency, the silence continues. The UN speaks, but it does not act with the urgency required. And every year lost means millions of lives at risk in the near future. And I still do not understand how countries remain in silence. But we, the youth, will not accept the silence. We are here to change and improve. I, Lucas Miguel, do not bring ready-made answers. However, I place myself at the disposal of this assembly with 3 commitments. First, to listen and learn, because no transformation is born in isolation. Second, to engage in dialogue, uniting different ideas and generations, because only then we can build real solutions. Third, to act together, to turn indignation into commitment, and commitment into change. If the United Nations in the past chose silence, then let us be the generation that chose voice, courage, and action. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the youth representative Lucas Miguel Neves Alemani for his statement. I now give the floor to the youth representative Sofia Silvia Ferreira.
Mrs. Kayane Angelim, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Mrs. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, in a map full of burning spots, where dialogue has been replaced by the sounds of sirens, drones, and intercepted missiles, I must ask, is this the spirit of our times? A world where consensus is increasingly rare, international law is losing strength, and words are often replaced by weapons. And as if in supplication, a theme echoed by many world leaders, diplomacy. As armed conflicts rise, such as in the Gaza Strip, the UN's influence has weakened. Yet, we are still guided by a charter written 80 years ago. The world has changed, and the must change with it. Article 109, written in 1945, offers a legal and moral path for reform. So it's time to restore the UN's role and fulfill our duty, ensure peace and security for all. Sustainable Development Goal 16 calls for peace, justice, and strong institutions. But we cannot achieve this goal with structures designed for a world that no longer exists. Institutions must evolve to reflect today's realities, voices, and needs. A framework frozen in the past fails to respond to the urgency of the present or prepare us for the future challenges. Reforming the Charter is not abandoning its spirit, it's fulfilling it. Let this be the moment we choose to act, to include, and thus reimagine our world. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the youth representative Sofia Silva Ferreira for her statement, and I now give the floor to the youth representative Audrey Figueiredo da Cruz. You have the floor.
Ms. Kayane Angelim, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, governments, and delegations, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, it's an honor to address you today. As a young person, it is a privilege to address the representative of the nations. I'm here not just with words, but as a voice for a generation that will not be silent. The tema united to reform a world reimagined is more than an idea. It is a clear call to action. The United Nations was created to protect us from war and has a promise to keep. We must all ask ourselves, are we truly living up to this promise? The United Nations, I recall of the opening words of our Charter's preamble, we, the peoples of the United Nations. This is not about powerful leaders, but about every one of us. The true inclusion of youth cannot be seen as a small detail. It must be at the very heart of this reform. We have the energy, the courage, and the ability to build a future where our voice is not just heard, but is the force for change. Our future cannot be built on the ruins of our planet. Environmental sustainability is not a matter for debate. It is our most important legacy. We see our planet showing signs of strain. Still, we also see new solutions, advances, and the firm resolve of millions of young people fighting for a greener world. The United Nations must evolve to reflect the realities of 21st century. Voices that we once ignored must now have a fair voice. This reform must be our proof that we believe in a more just and equal future. Our goal is not to do the past, but to build a better future. We believe that together we can truly reimagine a world of peace, justice, hope, and most importantly, action. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the youth representative Audrey Figueiredo da Cruz for her statement, and I now give the floor to the youth representative Mariana Sassiloto. You have the floor.
Ms. Kayane Angelim, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, imagine a world where children are torn between two fates, rebuilding a broken future or surviving a broken present. Unfortunately, that is not hypothetical. That is the weight our generation already carries. The UN Charter, once a promise for peace, now stands tested by a world it never foresaw. In 2024, we saw the highest number of state-based armed conflicts in over 70 years. The world has changed since 1945, but global governance has not. And when conflicts erupt, when climate disaster displaced millions, justice is delayed, and now data system silence just becomes complicity. We as youth are expected to solve tomorrow's crisis while excluded in today's decisions. How can we carry the weight of the future if denied space in the present? And that contradiction is why reform is urgent, not just structural, but purposeful. So let this is renewal over repetition, not for visibility and not change for power. That reforms the UN Charter, not for rewriting history, but for realigning it with today's realities and voices. We are not wanting to lead in some distant future. We are already shaping today's democracy, not for a brighter tomorrow, but for a today where, even if clouded, we still know the sun shines. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the youth representative Mariana Sassiloto for her statement, and I now give the floor to the youth representative Larissa Lopes Silva. You have the floor.
Thank you. Mrs. Kayani Angelin, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Mrs. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of General Assembly. Madam President, it is not secret that global disputes and conflicts remain an enduring reality in our world. Today, we witness an alarming race among powerful nations to develop increasingly advanced weapons. And in this context, that fuels global anxiety and fear of future threats. Since establishment after the Second World War, the United Nations has aimed to safeguard peace and foster diplomacy, seeking to prevent future wars. However, the challenges we face today are far greater and more complex than those imagined in 1945. Climate change, global pandemic, mass migration, and other forms of conflicts remain the limits of our current structures and demand bold reforms. This is why the themes of this conference, United for Reform, a reimagined world, carries a profound responsibility. In the days ahead, we will be presented with a critical opportunity to reflect upon and revise the guidelines that shape the work of the United Nations, adapting its missions and tools to the political, social, economic, and environmental realities of the 21st century. The manner in which we choose to address this problem is just as important as the issues themselves. As individuals molded by the society in which we live, our actions might be guided with our currents. So, by joining force, we can reimagine strong United Nations and build a future rooted in peace, equality, and justice for all humankind. Let us therefore embrace this call for change. Let us set aside division, selfishness, and hunger for power, and instead stand truly united, not only in ideas, but in actions. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the youth representative, Larissa Lopes Silva, for her statement, and I now give the floor to the youth representative, Isadora Galter Madete. You have the floor.
Ms. Kayane Angelin, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, ladies and gentlemen, head of state, government, and delegations. I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, if I were to ask any person in this room what the most important international body in the world is, I'm certain that the answer will be unanimous: the United Nations. It is a truth widely recognized across the globe. Yet, as the Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said, the only constant in life is change. If change is inevitable, it must also be embraced, even within the most important and essential organs of humankind. Too often, change is misunderstood as something that only occurs when the past has failed. However, I would like to call upon another philosopher, George Hegel, whose dialectical theory shows us a different perspective. According to him, every idea begins as a thesis, naturally generates its antithesis, and from the tension between these two emerges a synthesis. A synthesis is not a destruction of the thesis, but the very force that allows the thesis to remain relevant, to remain present. It is an improved version by the challenge it has faced. This is precisely the lesson that the youth of today must carry forward. Change is not threat to tradition, but the very force that allows tradition to remain relevant. Evolution is not rejection, but renewal. We, as the next generation, are not here to dismantle what has been built. We are here to strengthen it, to adapt it, and to ensure it can meet the challenge of tomorrow. Therefore, I call upon each delegate present here today. Let us not fear change, but champion it. Let us be the voice, the guardians of reconstruction, and the architects of an amazing charter that reflects both of the wisdom of the past and the vision of tomorrow. Thank you so much, Madam President.
I thank the youth representative Isadora Galter Gadetti for her statement, and I now give the floor to Fabiana Rolim Salomé Terramoto. You have the floor.
Ms. Kayane Angeline, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, governments and delegations, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, on June 26, 1945, there was a cause for celebration. The foundation for the United Nations had been laid. At the conference's close, President Truman said, "This charter will be expanded and improved as time goes on. Changing world conditions will require readjustments, and that time has come." Since then, the international landscape has deeply changed, and the charter has met the needs of its time. But now we live in an era where cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and social media shape the new geopolitical reality. In a world that is ours, its future unquestionably rests in our hands. To ignore the Charter's revision is choosing a mission regarding this new challenge. This is beyond just money or borders. We are talking about people dying due to the global, talking about biodiversity being destroyed, and children growing up without a guaranteed future. Revising the UN Charter is more than politics. It's a courageous affirmation that humanity can and must be more than it is. Is the recognition that change is not the only possible path for those who seek justice, peace, and a dignified tomorrow. Let this be the moment we unite, not just to reform a charter, but to reimagine our future. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the youth representative Fabiana Rolim Salomé Terramoto for her statement, and I now give the floor to the youth representative Avril Molina Ramirez. You have the floor.
Mrs. Kayane Angeline, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as the President of the General Assembly. Madam President, my name is Avril Ramirez. I spent the first part of my childhood in Mérida, Venezuela. As an immigrant, I was forced to learn that home can sometimes be far away. We may find ourselves in places miles away from where our heart truly belongs. And in my case, it wasn't a choice, it was a sacrifice made in search of a better life, one with safety, peace of mind, food on the table, and the assurance that I would enjoy my human rights every single day. From time to time, I wonder how my life would have turned out if my mother hadn't made the sacrifice of starting over completely, just to ensure that I would be okay. Nobody knew if I could have lived a dignified life in a country consumed by violence, which is my homeland, which I watch slowly turn to a nightmare, abandoned by the international community and leaving its people behind. I believe I speak not only for myself, but for many others when I say that no one should have worries about basic human sources or about whether they can live with dignity and peace. With courage every single day, I choose today to make that dream come true, to change the UN Charter. As we all know, the UN Charter has become an urgent issue in the international stage. The fact that after almost 80 years it has undergone so few reforms shows how the UN has fallen behind the evolution of society. And so the pressing question remains, is the UN truly guaranteeing international security? Deep down, we all know the answer. And from Brazil to Japan, across every single corner of the world, there are human beings, equal in worth, no matter their beliefs, nationality, or any other characteristic. We are the world, and we are all we have. It is up to us to build a future without discrimination, without violence, and one that confronts the challenge of a climate change. A world at peace. Reforming the UN Charter is surely one of the first steps on this long journey, a journey toward a truly human world. So I invite you, listeners, to walk beside me in this mission, to embrace peace, to build a world where no one is forced to abandon their home, where there belongs, a world without hunger and without war. This is my dream, to make it the humanity is never left behind again. Thank you, Madam President. Viva Venezuela.
I thank the last youth representative, Avril Molina Ramirez, for her statement. we will now proceed to the general debate of member states. Distinguished delegates, I invite the General Assembly to begin its general debate. I wish to inform delegations that the list of speakers during the general debate is closed, and to remind delegates who are in the list of speakers that the length of statements by individual delegations should be 2 minutes. I now give the floor to the first speaker on my list, the distinguished representative of Democratic Republic of the Congo. You have the floor.
Ms. Kayani Angelin, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, today's world is not the same as it was in 1945 when the UN Charter was conceived. The current scenario presents different challenges, such as climate change and rapid technological change that defy our legal system and comprehension. These problems cannot be adequately solved by structures created almost 80 years ago and with global powers in mind that do not reflect the international structure of the 21st century. Reimagining the global landscape means recognizing that multilateral cooperation needs to be more inclusive, representative, and incisive, aiming towards the effective implementation of human rights globally. The UN Charter must be updated to reflect the diversity and interdependence of contemporary society and need for fresh, young, and heterogeneous voices. Therefore, as we look to the future, it's not just about reforming institutions, but about ultimately reinventing the way that the international community organizes itself. It's time to revolutionize the UN into a truly democratic, representative, and meaningful organization, capable of responding to the demands of a constantly changing world that wants to leave colonialist and Eurocentric ideas in the past, where they belong. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative from the Democratic Republic of the Congo for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates. You have the floor.
Mrs. Kayani Angelin, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Mrs. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, the UN Charter dates back to 1945. On one hand, it reflects a noble pursuit on peace and human rights for all. On the other, it expresses the realities of an outdated order. Back in the 1940s, the UAE was still not a country properly because of colonial domination. This applies to several other nations as well. The world has changed drastically, and by dealing with modern-day issues through the lens of 80 years past, we are effectively setting ourselves aback. And this is precisely why the Charter must be reviewed and reformed immediately. The cracks in the UN's outline directly contradict the fundamental principles of equity among all nations. When it comes to Chapter 5, which is of utmost importance for it concerns the Security Council, the UAE has been actively pinpointing key aspects for the achievement of structural innovation. The expansion of permanent and non-permanent seats, as well as the assurance of the responsible use of veto power, are crucial topics of discussion. The Security Council lacks efficiency, and its flawed structure gets in the way of successful resolutions, even those of humanitarian urgency. Change begins within these walls. The UAE firmly believes that, through consensus, we may achieve a more egalitarian, representative, and fair system. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative from United Arab Emirates for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Antigua and Bermuda. You have the floor.
Good morning, guys. Ms. Kayani Angelin, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations. I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly, Madam President. Distinguished Chair, estimated delegates, Antigua and Barbuda believes in the importance in debating the topic United Reform, a road to imagine, in the current scenario. This topic reminds us that the future of multilateralism depends on our ability to imagine and reform of UN. And this topic, remember all of us present at this ceremony, the future of UN Charter is in our hands. And the future of this prestigious and important organization depends on us. For a small, wise, and developing state like ours, reform is not an abstract idea, it is a necessity for survival. We envision a world where the voices of all nations, regardless of size or power, carry equal weight in shaping global decisions. A reformed United Nations must prioritize inclusivity, transparency, and fairness. This requires a Secretary Council that reflects today's geopolitical realities, giving a stronger voice to regions long underrepresented, including the Caribbean and Global South. For Antigua and Barbuda, reform also means answering that pressing issues such as climate change, sustainable development, and migration are treated as urgent matters of peace and security. The credibility of UN depends on its ability to act decisively and equitably in the face of these shared challenges. We call upon this Assembly to imagine and to build a United Nations that truly serves all peoples, when where justice, representation, and solidarity are not ideals but daily practices. Only then can we honor the promise of UN Charter and secure a future of dignity and hope for generations to come. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative from Antigua and Bermuda for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Argentina.
Ms. Kayane Angeline, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the FAMUN 2025. Madam President, the United Nations Charter begins with the words, "We the peoples." This phrase reminds us how the reform must prioritize human dignity. In today's world, peace cannot be built without respect for human rights, social justice, and environmental protection. My name is Manuela Valentim Mantovani, delegate of the Republic of Argentina. Since the founding of the UN in 1945, Argentina has strongly advocated for dialogue, democracy, and cooperation between regions. Our history demonstrates how international law and collective work are stronger when guided by justice and inclusion. For this reason, Argentina believes that the reform of the Charter should pay greater attention to three main points. First, combating inequality, which threatens peace and quietly fuels armed conflict. Second, awareness of the importance of environmental security, as climate change fuels displacement and instability in general. And third, protecting vulnerable groups, ensuring that women, youth, indigenous people, and the elderly are not left behind. Madam President, the theme, United to Reform, a World Reimagined, is an invitation to reflect on past limitations and build solutions that truly reflect the values we share here. Argentina stands ready to work with all members and delegates to ensure that the United Nations remains a symbol of hope, justice, and cooperation for future generations. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative from Argentina, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom. You have the floor.
Thank you. Ms. Kayane Angeline, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, heads of state, government, and delegations, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, never before in the history of this organization have we, the member states, gathered with a shared purpose to engage in a thorough and comprehensive review of the Charter of the United Nations after the deployment of Article 109. It is encouraging that, after decades of hesitation, we have reached consensus on the need to consider reform. But at the same time, it is sobering that it has taken us so long to arrive at this moment. The challenges of the 21st century have made it clear. Our institutions are not fully equipped to respond to the realities we face. Climate change, energy insecurity, widening inequality, and declining quality of life are all pressing issues with regards to the well-being of peoples and states. When compounded by more traditional threats such as rearmament, mass atrocities, violations of human rights and of international law, ethnic conflict, and the spread of advanced weaponry, they remind us of the limitations of the current international framework in safeguarding peace and stability. In other words, we are holding on to a wooden plank during a tsunami. As we look ahead, let us not be fooled by the apparent consensus that brought us here. The task before us is not simple. In the coming days, we will be undertaking the most challenging exercise of modern diplomacy. But consensus is not beyond our reach. Indeed, it is our responsibility. After all, the only options on the table are reform or rupture. Thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank the representative from United Kingdom, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bahrain. You have the floor.
Mrs. Kayani Angeline, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Mrs. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, almost 8 decades have passed since the adoption of the Charter of the United Nations, a document that marked a crucial step in the modern international order after the devastation of the Second World War. Today, we met under the theme, United Reform, a World Reimagined, because we all recognize that the world of the 2025 is not the world of 1945. Our new reality demands attention to the contemporary emergencies, such as climate change, hunger, humanitarian crisis, cybersecurity, and social inequalities. The Kingdom of Bahrain believes in the necessity of the UN reform. It is not a fundamental procedure, but also a step to shape the future of our planet. An organization that calls for peace, security, and human dignity must be representative, democratic, respectful, and efficient. Guided by Chapter 5, Bahrain urges reform of the Security Council to ensure greater representation of the Global South and least developed countries. So the decision reflects the diversity and realities of the international community. Madam President, Bahrain reaffirms its cooperation with all member states to promote a UN Charter more representative, equitable, and committed to human dignity. Reform is not simply a choice, but a shared duty to promote a fair and sustainable future. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative from Bahrain for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ecuador. You have the floor.
Good morning. Ms. Kayani Angeline, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations, I want to congratulate you, Yasmin Alves, on your selections as President of the General Assembly. Madam President and delegations, the Charter of the United Nations, written and consensually approved on June 26, 1945, was created at a time of great necessity. We know about it. 8 years have since passed. It's just like a live microorganism, it must be updated, rethink, and managed. of Ecuador see this abundant need to rethink the weak points of the current charter. We encourage the states of political and economic expression to obtain more representative on United Nations. These are countries that face the highest rates of lack of healthcare, internal conflicts, and situations that are rarely addressed. We know the less significant changes institutional have always come from the great nations, and don't from smaller one. This is so clear when we look at the Security Council. The best example is the great mobility and action shall be the major countries regarding the war between Russia and Ukraine in February of this year. And at the same time, we have the crise in the Sahel with conflicts and deaths caused by terrorism. And once again, C, no mobilization from the United Nations Security Council. We are leaving the security of state in the hands of selective leaders. We hold role to bring security and stability, or at last, it shall be. By joining together, we can certainly create a new scenario of peace and resolution, now aiming solely the great powers. The Republic of Ecuador values the world peace, and we do with determination. But if there are still smaller conflicts and people are still dying, then we are not fulfilling our roles as we should. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you.
I thank the representative from Ecuador for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Filipinas.
Ms. Kayana Angelim, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, head of states, government, and delegations. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, 79 years ago in San Francisco, nations dared to ask, can peace be built by words and several weapons? The UN Charter was their answer, a promised generation yet unborn. But today, we must ask a new question. How can a pact writing in 1945 lead us through pandemics, climate collapse, and the rise of artificial intelligence? Has the Charter aged, or have we failed to reinvent its meaning for our time? Its values, peace, dignity, equality, remain timeless. What changes the rhythm of our world? Crises spread in hours, decisions echo in seconds. And no border is thick enough to hold back their impact. And so today, I do not speak only for the Philippines. I speak for the youth who believe that change is not tomorrow's task, but today's right. Why dream of a better future if we cannot first demand a different present? Because the UN essence was never to preserve the world as it is, but to rebuild as it should be. Now, more than ever, we are not united by what we inherited, but by what we dared to invent. United to reform, united to reimagine, united to recreate the world. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative from Philippines for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Ms. Kayana Angelim, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, on behalf of the Russian Federation, I would like to congratulate the General Assembly and its members for recognizing the importance of reforming the United Nations Charter. Under the agenda, United to Reform, a World Reimagined, nations of the world could build international cooperation, reaffirm our shared commitment to peace, security, and prosperity. The Russian Federation welcomes the debates of a new charter, which represents a collective effort to modernize the United Nations and guarantee that it comprehends the realities of an interconnected world full of transformations. This charter does not constitute a merely set of rules. It is a vision of a world where dialogue prevails over conflicts, where sovereignty and autonomy of all nations are respected, and where multilateralism is key to a new global order. We hope that this new charter will strengthen the capacity of the United Nations to prevent conflicts and address the challenges that no nation can face alone, from global health crisis to systematic genocides of subjugated peoples. By creating a more inclusive and representative United Nations, this charter will ensure that all regions can significantly contribute to the decision-making and building trust and cooperation and just solutions. Russia believes that through this reform, we can share prosperity and lasting peace. Together, guided by the principles of this reform charter, we can transform our world into a place where every nation has a voice, every citizen can live in security and dignity. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative from the Russia Federation for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vanuatu. You have the floor.
Mrs. Kayane Angeline, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, ladies and gentlemen, heads of states, governments, and delegations, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Mrs. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, a country is disappearing. The United Nations was created under the premise of preventing conflicts, economic, and social and humanitarian problems. But when it's faced with one of the greatest current challenges, the climate crisis, it has proven incompetent. Under the threat of permanently losing parts of its territory, the states of Vanuatu fight relentlessly to reduce the endless pollution and degradation, hoping for a less drastic future. However, the UN has shown itself incapable of fulfilling its promises when it failed to reduce potent gas emission rates from countries, taking away the hope that the current model of the organization can mitigate the effects of climate changes. The reform at the United Nations Charters is extremely urgent, especially when we see countries disappearing beneath the sea and receiving only 0.22% of the climate financing agreed upon in Paris, even though there are 3 of the current permanent members of the Security Council among the 5 largest global polluters. Reforming the Security Council so that countries suffering from climate crisis have a voice, budgetary support to mitigate the damage caused by these types of troubles, and penalties against countries that fail to meet climate targets are steps towards saving lives. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative from Vanuatu for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guatemala. You have the floor.
Ms. Candy Angeline, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government and heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of General Assembly. Madam President and delegation, and delegates. The delegation of Guatemala greets this assembly as the opportunity to contribute to this vital debate on reform our founding charter. We believe UN strength lies in its ability to adapt, ensure, and preamble and chapters 1 and 5 fully reflect the principles of sovereignty, women, dignity, and sovereign equality of states. We propose that the preamble and chapter 1 be strengthened to explicitly include environment, protect, and the rights of indigenous peoples as fundamental pillars for international peace and sector. Regard chapter 5. I advocate for reform of the sector council that expand its membership, ensure fairer and more equitable regional representation, including their permanent presence in nations from Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean. Greater transparency in work methods is also crucial to legitimize its action before the informed membership. We affirm the reform, more representative and effective UN is essential to take two complex global challenges of the century. Thank you, Madam.
I thank the representative from Guatemala for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nauru. You have the floor.
Ms. Kayani Angelin, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, the Republic of Nauru, a small island nation in the Pacific, experiences with great intensity the challenges of our time. Our limited territory and scarce resources do not shield us from global issues, such as climate change, economic dependence, food insecurity, and social vulnerability. On the contrary, these challenges strike us even more severely. The rising sea threatens our very survival, while the scarcity of resources compels us to rethink our models of development. For Nauru, reforming a reimagined world is not merely an aspiration, it is a vital necessity. This world must be rebuilt so that small nations have an effective voice where solidarity becomes concrete action, and where the multilateral system is fairer, more representative, and committed to the future generations. We believe that a reimagined future can only be achieved through international cooperation, shared responsibility, and respect for the diversity of nations. No country, whether large or small, can face today's global dilemmas alone. Let us unite our voices, transform our differences into collective strengths, and ensure that a reimagined world is built upon peace, justice, and sustainability for all. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative from Nauru for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Paraguay. You have the floor.
Thank you. Ms. Kayani Angelin, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, we must be sincere and acknowledge that we're all failing to build a better reality. We live in a troubled and volatile world facing extremely difficult times. Armed conflicts, tremendous challenges, economic uncertainty, attacks on the values of democracy, the risk of climate change, rising authoritarianism, and brutal inequity. And these are only some of the immense problems before us. As the 88th anniversary of the United Nations approaches, the reform of its charter stands as a fundamental political choice, one that will redefine the role of this organization in the 21st century. The Republic of Paraguay, having reaffirmed its unwavering commitment to democracy, emphasized that the world today requires diplomatic solutions. Removing or limiting the veto can make the United Nations more representative and effective in addressing the urgent needs of humanity. Although our political or ideological visions might differ, this should not divide us for prevent or moving forward in building cooperation based on solid foundations. With a profound sense of concern for the state of our world, the Republic of Paraguay calls upon the United Nations community to consider the invocation of Article 109 of the United Nations Charter. This provision, long demurred, offers us the path to convene a general conference for the comprehensive review of the Charter of the United Nations, so that we might rebuild this vital institution and render it strong and effective once again. As Bernardino Caballero, a great military man from Paraguay, said, "The future is the child of the present." That means that we can have a better future if we act here and today. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative from Paraguay for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan. You have the floor.
Ms. Kayane Angeline, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election as President of the General Assembly. Madam President, Japan rises today not only as a nation, but as a symbol of resilience, of peace, and of commitment to humanity. We are the land of the rising sun, and our light has always been one of hope, not of conquest. Japan is the only country in history to have endured the devastations of nuclear weapons. We know more than anyone the price of war and the value of peace. And yet, from that rose, not with vengeance, but with the pledge to protect human dignity. Today, under the theme United to Reform, a World Reimagined, Japan's story proves that reform is not only possible, it is necessary. To reimagine a world is not an abstract idea for us. It is our lived reality. We rebuild our nation from ruin. That is what it means to reimagine. This Japanese art, the kintsugi, represents our nation. Even when broken, we choose to rebuild with strength, beauty, and hope. This is the proof that from our fractures, a stronger whole can emerge. Japan now stands as the world's third largest economy, a leader in technology, development, and humanitarian cooperation. And most importantly, Japan has made human security the very heart of its foreign policy, ensuring that everyone lives free from fear and free from want. And the United Nations, this is not the Japan's principle, just the principles. It is the United Nations framework that it must adopt if it truly wishes to reform. Delegates, the future of the United Nations will not be built on empty promises, but on real vision and real courage. If we're truly united to reform, then let us follow the example of a nation that turned destruction into determination and isolation into cooperation. That nation is Japan. That future begins with the land of the rising sun. For peace and for dignity. In Japanese, Heiwa no tame ni, songe no tame ni. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative from Japan for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative from Liechtenstein. You have the floor.
Thank you. Ms. Kayane Angeline, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, government, and delegations, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate you, Ms. Yasmin Alves, on your election of President of General Assembly. Madam President, for Liechtenstein, one of the smallest member states of United Nations, the credibility and legitimacy of this organization rests on its ability to act decisively when humanity faces urgent global needs. Yet, all too often, the Security Council has been paralyzed by the use of veto, leaving civilians without protection, undermining international law and the multilateral system. The veto cannot remain as an unchecked privilege. It must subject to accountability and responsibility, consistent with the principles upon this organization was founded. For this reason, we strongly stand for a reform of UN Charter, ensuring that the use of the veto is transparent, justified, and consistent with the Charter's primary responsibility, the international peace and security. The world is tired of empty promises and declarations that fail to translate into meaningful action. What is required is political courage and genuine commitment to security. Liechtenstein believes that no nation, regardless of side, should be silenced or disregarded when fundamental principles of peace, security, and human dignity are at stake. The message is, the responsibility must accompany power. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative from Liechtenstein for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Finland. You have the floor.
Thank you. Ms. Kayani Angelin, Secretary of General of FAMUN 2025, Heads of State, Government and Delegations, ladies and gentlemen. President of General Assembly, Madam President. Finland, which has embraced such a wide range of human rights for so many years, valuing education, tolerance, and respect, allowing various people a choice without judgment for the law, being the first country in Europe to permit and approve women's suffrage, giving women a voice, implementing a free public education system, enabling children from a very young age to have a vision of the world they live in and make a choice based on it, thus creating a more independent and fair youth. In this year of 2025, with the change, reform, and improvement of the sublime UN Charter, think of so many people who just want to be accepted and have the right to be themselves, to one their of oneself. Our citizens do not want to pretend to be something they are not. They want to go out on the street without fear of not returning. They want to be with the government and not against. They want to feel safe in a place, in a country they can come home. I hope we make the decisions that change the world and that make a more peaceful and just place, that accepts its inhabitants for who they are without prejudice, linguistic, racial, gender, sexual, religious, socioeconomic, appearance, or wherever. Thank you very much, all and the delegates who will be participating today, and thank you, Ms. President.
I thank the representative from Finland for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States of America. You have the floor.
Thank you. Ms. Kayane Angelin, Secretary General of FAMUN 2025, ladies and gentlemen, heads of states, governments, and delegations. I would like to congratulate you, Mrs. Yasmin Alves, in your election as President of the General Assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam President, today we gather here not to preserve what was built 80 years ago, but to reimagine what must be built for tomorrow. The Charter of the United Nations, born in 1945 from the ashes of the war, gave humanity a framework for peace, yet is no longer sufficient. To meet the challenge of our century, climate change, inequality, and geopolitical instability demand not preservation, but transformation. As leaders, we must acknowledge that our institutions still fail to reflect the diversity of the world we live in. Too many voices remain unheard, too many nations underrepresented, and too many decisions are shaped by structures designed for another time. Respect for our past cannot justify inaction in our present. It's not a question of erasing a history. It's a matter of ensuring that the United Nations represents all people with fairness while maintaining his legitimacy and strength. Change is not optional. Reform is not a dream, but a responsibility we must uphold. If we, as youth, can envision a new world, then it's our duty to build into being. Let this conference be more than a simulation. Let this conference be a declaration that our generations choose progress over stagnation, cooperation over division, and justice over privilege. United as countries and people, we can reimagine the United Nations and reimagine the world. Thank you, Madam President. I
I thank the representative from the United States of America for her statement. We have heard the last speaker on my list for the opening plenary. The first meeting of the 12th session of FAMUN is now adjourned. Now I give the floor to the Master of Ceremonies for her final remarks.
Thank you, Madam President. Back to português. Bom, foi inspirador ouvir os discursos tão comprometidos com a construção de uma nova ONU. Tenho certeza de que os próximos dias do FAMUN serão tão emocionantes quanto a nossa cerimônia e plenária de abertura. Antes de encerrar, gostaria de pedir a atenção de todas e todos para alguns recados importantes. Nós estamos aguardando todos vocês aqui no campus da FACAMP para o nosso credenciamento e a nossa primeira sessão de simulação. O credenciamento terá início às 1h30 da tarde. Não esqueçam de trazer um documento de identificação, um RG, e o seu termo de responsabilidade, o Liability Waiver, assinado. Hoje nós também teremos 2 eventos sociais. O primeiro acontecerá às 3h30 da tarde, antes da primeira sessão de simulação. Nós teremos o evento Breaking the Ice, Building Connections, para que os participantes possam se conhecer melhor. E, às 6h30, nós teremos o evento United on the Dance Floor, com muita dança, para celebrar o primeiro dia do FAMUN. Bom, distintas delegações, nós esperamos todos vocês aqui presencialmente no campus da FACAMP, às 1h30 da tarde. Agora, eu gostaria de chamar ao palco João Vitor Bueno, subsecretário para a Gestão Logística. Chamo também Marina Vendramini, assistente do subsecretário para a Gestão Logística. Antônio de Paula, subsecretário para Comunicações Globais. E Matheus Toledo, assistente do subsecretário para Comunicações Globais. Finalmente, passo a palavra para o secretariado sênior do FAMUN, para que façam as honras e declarem abertos os trabalhos do FAMUN 2025.
Distintos delegados, distintas delegadas, em nome do Secretariado Sênior do FAMUN 2025, declaro, então, abertos os trabalhos da 12ª edição do FAMUN 2025.